professional experience, emergency response experience, most recently while serving as the Deputy Fire Chief with the City of Calgary. He oversaw a diverse portfolio including Fire Training Academy, critical medical response support, technical team support, 911 service management, and hazardous materials response support. He also focused much of his work on training sustainability, fostering a culture of diversity, inclusion, and empowerment, and enhancing firefighter health and wellness. And Joe is on the virtual part of this meeting, and he's also in chambers here today. So to council, just a introduction of Joe, and welcome Joe to the City of Edmonton.
Well, welcome, Chief. Appreciate your distinguished service to date in the city to remain nameless, but welcome to Edmonton. And actually, no, Calgary's been through a lot, so recently and historically, and so your experience with emergency management there, but also a capable fire service will be valuable to us here. So thank you for choosing Edmonton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Adam. It's my honor to serve this great city and serve with all of you. Mic's on. Can everybody hear?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Excellent. Edmonton's a fire service that has a record of excellence and the protection of life, property, and environment, and as well as a strong reputation. It has that reputation of continuous improvement and is both nationally and internationally recognized. And my focus will be to build on this success and evolve our service to meet the highest standards of our changing profession. And I really want to thank Council and the members of ELT and everyone in Edmonton Fire Rescue Services for the honor of leading a highly respected essential service that people in this city can rely on. I will make you and our city proud. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I see from the chat that Councillor Zadek notes that he has been here the whole time but couldn't hear until now.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, we have you listed now. We would have to reconsider the votes however, because we couldn't hear you at the time. So if you were not aware that the votes were happening, it's difficult to infer your position on them, notwithstanding that they would likely pass unanimously. But so we've got you. Pardon me?
Sorry, Mayor, I was just going off of the way that I was informed to join these meetings, and there was no audio, and there was other chat about other people couldn't hear, and it was confirmed that nothing was happening. So I'm here now. If you want to reconsider the vote, if it's to approve the agenda, I'd be in favor of reconsideration and then vote in favor of it. If you just want to move on, that's fine.
Okay, I think we'll move on in the interest of time, but thank you for letting us know that you're here, and it was noted that you made best efforts to be here at the start of the meeting. So thank you for that. There are 4 items on the agenda here, 3.1 and 3.2. We'll hear in public. 4.1 we'll take in private at the end. So on 3.1 and 3.2, Mr. Laughlin, go ahead.
Can I just confirm there's 3 items on today's agenda? I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing.
Sorry, did I say 2?
Just to confirm that there's 3 items. Thank you very much.
There are 3, not 4. Sorry, it's because the 4th one's labeled. Because the 3rd one's labeled 4. That's. I'm tired. What are you going to do? There are only 3 items on this agenda. If we want to make it 2, I'm fine with that too. But let's hear from Mr. Laughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of committee. This week, I will report on how the city incorporates many perspectives into its decisions and actions. We aim to place diversity and inclusion at the heart of our approach, consistently and intentionally. It's how we strive for decisions that reflect the needs and experience of marginalized populations during all phases of our COVID-19 work. I'll provide updates on several of the initiatives that have been implemented over the past few weeks, and I will flag several decisions that are upcoming. Finally, I will review the sole decision-making assessment that informs our recommendation for not renewing the city's state of local emergency today. It is well accepted that COVID-19 has hit marginalized communities disproportionately. As we work to protect the health and safety of Edmontonians and our employees during the phases of relaunch, recovery, and reimagine, we strive to reflect that reality into our decisions and actions. Gender-based analysis plus is a tool in our diversity and inclusion framework that we use to ensure our work is evidence-based, appropriately targeted, efficient, and focused on equality of outcomes. It is a process that prompts us to consider our perspectives, to be aware of our implicit biases, and take into account the realities and experiences of marginalized Edmontonians and employees. We are working hard to embed this into our structure, and as you can see from the slide, our goal is to make it a core element of our culture. Uncertain times, like what we have been going through with the COVID crisis, are the perfect opportunity to reimagine our work using equity as a lens. Our GBA Plus strategy impacts the inputs that go into making COVID-19 recommendations. From projects, plans, and briefing notes to communication and workplace management practices, these records of our work are how we infuse GBA Plus capacity into our organization. We strive to ensure that the language and content of our work is inclusive and meaningful for the greatest number of people. Task teams have a GBA Plus subject matter expert who prompts the team to apply the GBA Plus process throughout the assessment of the issues and opportunities. Relaunch, recovery, and reimagine phases provide us with the opportunity to embrace the difference as good. In particular, the pace of recovery and reimagine work allows us to be more methodical and build GBA Plus into our processes and work products. This will be the time in which our GBA Plus approach matures and becomes more overt. The Edmonton Economic Recovery Grant that Council approved last week is a good example of how we built the GBA Plus approach into our plans. The grant provides support to local businesses to help mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. Applicants must identify the benefits of the grant to marginalized populations, which introduces a GBA Plus lens of whole community impacts to plans for restarting businesses. The targets we have set for the distribution of grant funds are 30% to business owners who self-identify as a member of a marginalized community, 30% to projects or programs that directly target businesses that are members of marginalized groups. And on a personal leadership note, it has been impossible to watch events this week without being reminded how critical it is for us to work in an inclusive and equitable way. As an organization that is led by mainly white leadership, we are deeply committed to examining and activating our role as to address violence, racism, oppression, and discrimination in the organization, in Edmonton, and in society generally. This means we will continue to look within and address our own biases and the ways that systemic and structural racism plays itself out. You have my commitment that our leadership team will continue to work to embed the GBA Plus approach in all of our work, and will listen closely to those who have lived with racism so that we can learn from them and lead more effectively. Shifting gears, in terms of some of the relaunch data and progress that we can report on.
Adam, take a breath. That was really good. That was important to hear. And take a breath before the next piece. Thank you.
In terms of community gardens, there are now over 80 permanent community gardens in the Edmonton area on public and private land. That includes 29 pop-up gardens, 28 of which have been installed. With the introduction of pop-up gardens program, we estimate that there are more than 350 participants. Going forward, we will be adjusting community garden guidelines if there are any changes to AHS rules. In terms of shared streets, there are currently 21 shared street locations giving Edmontonians additional space to practice safe physical distancing as they move around the neighborhood. The last of our planned locations are scheduled to open today and tomorrow. They include 113th Street from 111th Ave to 105th Ave, 109th Avenue from 118th Street to 109th Street, 109th Avenue from 109th Street to 106th Street, 96th Street from 111th Ave to 103A Avenue, and 108A Avenue from 96th Street to 94th Street. In terms of patio or retail expansions, to date, 43 businesses have registered to expand their outdoor space and maximize their customer capacity while respecting physical distancing requirements. 27 out of the 42 patio expansions are located within business improvement areas, 124th Street, downtown, Old Strathcona, Kingsway, and Stony Plain Road. 15 patio expansions are not in BIAs. The majority of applications are in the downtown and Old Strathcona areas. One business has applied for an outdoor retail space. One patio expansion launched May 28th, and most of the other applicants are conducting exploratory sessions with the city and are engaging with BIA members. In terms of sports fields, play and open spaces amenities, compliance at all sports courts, playgrounds, skate parks, and outdoor amenities has been good over this past weekend and this week. Our enforcement officials continue to educate the public on their obligation to adhere to public health requirements. But we are encouraged by recent behavior and are prepared to keep all amenities open this weekend, including the 4 that were previously closed. In terms of animal care and control, the volume of visitors to the Animal Care and Control Center has picked up to an average of 31 in-person visits per day. Most of these are related to pet licensing inquiries. The intake of stray dogs totals 33, and 18 of them have been reunited with their owners. As of June 1st, the center is at 30% capacity, which is in line with our projections. Phase 2 of our reopening plan for the center, the intake of healthy stray cats, will be shared next week. About 200 electronic scooters rolled out on Edmonton streets Monday with strict hygiene requirements in place. The 2 operators are cleaning their scooters once a day and urging their customers to practice proper hand hygiene before and after each use. Scooters are corralled at 10 locations for drop-off and pickup. These locations are away from Main Street and high pedestrian locations. E-scooter fleet size will be phased in over the summer months. The license agreements with the operators will be suspended if e-scooters are found to be a source of local COVID transmission, if users or the company are not adhering to cleaning protocols, or if e-scooter use is judged to be a hazard to pedestrians or to other vehicles. Ridership continues to increase on transit, putting pressure on passenger loads and causing us to develop strategies to ensure we protect the health and safety of operators and Edmontonians. On some routes, we're experiencing full buses at peak times. In the last week of May, ridership was at 45% compared to the same time last year. And the trend of increasing passenger volumes has continued into the beginning of June. In preparation for the June 15th resumption of transit fares, we are addressing how different customer groups will obtain their tickets and passes. For example, the Ride Transit program that provides passes to roughly 40,000 low-income customers will be sent by mail. At the same time, we are developing solutions for situations where passes are returned or not received. Alberta Health Services has provided 500,000 non-surgical face masks that ETS will distribute to customers starting later this week. The logistics involved are complex, and we are working to streamline the process. For upcoming relaunch decisions, the dates could be as soon as June 15th for some, and likely longer for others based on receiving appropriate guidance from Alberta Health Services to proceed. The reopening plan for the funicular and elevator is under discussion and could be announced next week. We are close to finalizing our rent payment approach for vendors who lease space in city buildings and facilities. We expect to advise of restart details for rental bookings of city-owned, city-operated outdoor sports fields, ball diamonds, and picnic sites soon. The sales offices for Beachmount and South Haven cemeteries have been closed to the public, and we are finalizing details related to their operations during reopening. We have heard that the reopening of arenas and gyms may be moved into stage 2, which will require a series of decisions to be made and implemented. The state of local emergency was initially issued on March 20th to ensure that the city could promptly coordinate action, issue special regulation of persons or property, protect the safety, health, or welfare of people, and acquire, restore, or maintain essential services and facilities. The state of local emergency gave the city enhanced enforcement powers and the ability to send an immediate message to those who were not adhering to safe practices. As public health and economic restrictions have lifted, the state of local emergency has been a reminder to Edmontonians that the crisis is not over and we are poised to take action if required. Last week I shared the decision-making model that we use to assess the status of our state of local emergency indicators. The assessments have been completed weekly to support the decision to recommend that we either renew or conclude the city's state of local emergency. This week's assessment shows that most indicators are in the green zone within acceptable limits or not a current consideration. 3 indicators are in the yellow zone, which means we are closely monitoring for possible changes or escalation. Specifically, we are watching the number of cases per 100,000 population and the number of cases within the population of those experiencing homelessness. We are also alert for any migration from green or yellow to red in our indicators. Based on this week's assessment and the fact that the public health statistics in the Edmonton zone have remained relatively stable for the past 3 weeks, the Emergency Management Agency is recommending that the state of local emergency not be renewed. I want to be clear that the COVID crisis is still with us and the risk of transmission remains high. We should expect spikes in the future as public health restrictions are lifted and Edmontonians connect more with people outside their family cohorts. We will continue to need speed, flexibility, and nimbleness for decision-making in the weeks and months ahead. These factors have characterized our actions and progress to date, and we have built them into our relaunch and recovery processes. We feel we can continue to operate quickly and with agility while meeting the Emergency Advisory Council's need for information. We have some recommendations for how to proceed outside of the state of local emergency. Maintaining open lines of communication with Council continues to be critical in all phases of relaunch and recovery. I recommend that Council Initiatives working groups continue and that the Emergency Advisory Committee, or if Council chooses a special Council meeting, be scheduled every second week. We will be bringing a report back to Council with the proposed dates. This slide shows what the calendar would look like for the next 3 months. We will bring back I've said this, we will bring back a report with the adjusted schedule. If the state of local emergency is not renewed, we would be in alignment with the provincial direction of not renewing the state of provincial public health emergency that we're anticipating on June 15th. The Emergency Advisory Committee and Council do not gain any additional authorities or new functions. The powers under the state of local emergency or delegated authority do not revert back to Council. The city does not automatically revert to its prior state. There will be no impact on current city decisions, as all were made using delegated authority and did not rely on the special powers granted by the state of local emergency. State of local emergency orders automatically are terminated, and that's the Expo Center. Council can call a special council meeting to declare a state of local emergency on short notice if it becomes necessary. Many directions and processes related to our COVID-19 response will remain the same. The city manager has delegated authority over the operations and administration of the city. Subject to explicit direction from Council, not the Emergency Advisory Committee, administration can make decisions within our authority. Examples of decisions within administration's authority include matters related to employees, operations, and strategy, agreements on behalf of the city, such as grant funding, reporting on all matters and issues affecting the city, budget adjustments that do not exceed $2 million per adjustment and do not increase the net tax levy, an emergency expenditure not in an approved budget that does not exceed $2 million from any source of funds, the suspension, cancellation, issuance, reinstatement, and imposition of conditions on license, permits, certificates, and demands, some of which are governed by a related bylaw, approval of tax agreements, approval of acquisition and disposition of land easements, and disposition of burial plots, closure of roads, approve expropriation agreements, and lease city land. The Emergency Advisory Committee can continue to meet with the mandate as set out in its bylaws. The orders issued by Chief Medical Officer of Health remain in effect, enforceable by EPS, and currently also enforceable by our city peace officers. The relaunch task team remains intact to oversee administration's relaunch efforts and provide Council with regular updates. Council can determine or direct the level of reporting it receives, either through memo, weekly special council meetings, or other. Committee meetings resume at the direction of Council. So again, I'm recommending that the state of local emergency not be renewed and that we set up EAC meetings on a bi-weekly basis, and a report will be coming to Council to articulate that. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for the report and the recommendation. So does that mean we can delete 3.2?
If that's a question to me, that's up to Council, or you can just receive it for information.
Yeah. Well, there could be some debate, I suppose, but the recommendation is not to renew. So it would expire at midnight tonight if no action is taken, right? Okay. I have a speakers list forming up here. So far, I have Councillor Katarina, Councillor Knack, Councillor Essinger, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Paquette, and Councillor Banga, and then Councillor Walters. So Councillor Katarina, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And Adam, thank you at the start here for everything that you and administration have done up until this point and going forward. And I'm glad to see we're at a point where we can remove the soul at this point. So, but to David Zarikin, just to follow up on your recent email to me, I've been in regular contact with you and some of the challenges that have been going on and continue to go on at the Expo Center. And given the numbers that seem very, very small, and now today with this recommendation. Can you be a little bit more specific on what work you have to do still to stand the Expo Center down in the next little while, and maybe a timeline of what we can expect? Is it days? Is it weeks? And with the sole, if the recommendation passes, not in existence, how does that affect the Expo Center at this point?
Councillor Caterina, I'll actually ask Mr. Smythe to answer that question.
Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Caterina, we are meeting with two ministries of the Alberta government, Homeward Trust, and internal staff tomorrow to work on a detailed plan. We've talked to EDC. They're looking at over the next, this is a very rough estimate, sort of 6 to 8 weeks, when they are going to sort of begin to relaunch their operations there. The key point that we want to work on, though, is not just working at Expo, but as you're well aware, there's agencies in Kinsman Sports Center and Central Lions, and we want to coordinate that effort. So develop a plan for all three of those facilities. So that's as much as I can inform now. Once we gel a plan, we'll certainly communicate that to City Council.
Okay, so no more specifics in that. Are you talking weeks and not months? If we're correct and the province is going to stand down their state of emergency, does that have a bearing on the timing for us?
Well,
And the reason why, and David, you would be more aware of this, I forwarded you many concerns that just keep escalating and escalating the longer the Expo Center has stood up with the social disorder that's going on in the area. And now it's reached east of Beverly Heights, and it's reached north to Dalton. It's reached west to Alberta Avenue. So a lot of challenges right now and a lot of concerns from constituents about the far-reaching effect that this has had, given that the numbers have been so small in the number of cases out of that center. So I really need to have a sense of, days, weeks, months. That's extremely important for me, and being able to relay that message.
well, Councillor, as I indicated, it's only an estimate at this point in time, but the 6 to 8 week period is kind of what we're looking at. But we do want to have a plan in place as opposed to just shuttering the facility. Those individuals, as you're well aware, are high needs individuals, and just turning them back to their some of the home facilities, which are too small to meet provincial regulations. We do need to look at possible other venues in our city, possibly, or what are some other options are. And we have to engage directly with the government of Alberta. They have a lot of skin in this game, and do play a fairly strong role, not just funding, but figuring out what that plan is. So that 6 to 8 week time frame is an estimate, but it is what we're kind of leaning towards.
If, Councillor Caterina, if I can add a couple of comments. We continue to work the external Expo plan and share those concerns of citizens through your office and through 311 with our friends at Edmonton Police Service, and they continue to respond. And so we think that's mitigating the concerns that citizens have, but there's certainly work to continue. As far as the numbers go in the centre in Edmonton, they're very positive and they're trending very positively, and so we certainly think that will have an impact on the sort of the next steps and stages, and so we think that we're trending in the right direction that might see movement sooner than later.
Well, that would be helpful. Again, if we're looking at that time frame, which is, in my opinion, way too long after the soul has been lifted. If that's the case, then continued enforcement and with the communities really affected by this, I think Mr. Akin has to be moved up the priority list, whoever's involved in doing this, especially now during the summer months where people are directly affected with items going missing in the backyards and people still doing what they shouldn't be doing in public places and those sorts of things. And I thought we had a better handle on it a couple of weeks ago, but it seems to be escalating at this point now from the number of complaints that I've received in the last week or so.
Understood. We will continue to work with that task team and with Edmonton Police Service.
Thank you, Councillor Caterina.
Thank you.
Next up is Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for all the information in the presentation. So I guess my first question, since the recommendation is to not continue, is going to be around how we'll continue to communicate the seriousness of the situation still. I've had a couple of virtual conversations with some seniors groups this week since it's Seniors Week, and there's been some feedback that really over the last week or two, we've seen a lot more pushback from people. There was even this past few days, I got like 20 or 30 emails from people saying that we've got to end our summertime lockdown, which wasn't happening, but there was this assumption that somehow the city is going to be locking everything down. So ending this, and I think you've raised good reasons why we would want to do that, and I would support that recommendation that you've put forward. But how have we thought about how we're going to continue to communicate the importance of physical distancing, the recommendations just to maintain everything, the success that we've had. The reason we haven't seen the numbers, which a lot of people reference as the reason why we should stop doing any type of restriction, is that we haven't had a large number. Well, we haven't had it because we've been so diligent. So can you share some thoughts on that first?
Ms. Owen may jump in here, but I'll start. So we continue to communicate on a regular basis around our expectations. Our peace officers are out educating daily, hourly, by the minute to ensure that folks are aware of those restrictions still being in place. We carry messaging from the province to support the province around still making sure that these restrictions are being followed. The recommendation of continuing to have these meetings on a different schedule continues to provide us the opportunity to engage with you and ask you to support us in that communication effort, and also get intel from you in terms of where or what are you seeing that we need to maybe step up and make sure that we're carrying that message. And just like this past weekend where we are not seeing broad compliance and it's within something that's within our control from a closure perspective, we will close. We don't want to do that. We want to use the approach that we have, which is educate, warn, fine, and then get to closure if needed, but we're prepared to take those steps. And I don't know if Catherine has more.
All I would add to that is to say that we have a close relationship with the relaunch team. So anything that needs to be communicated is done so via our website, social media, and through conversations with the media. And we would not slow that down any. We would keep our foot on the gas in terms of communication. Not being in a state of local emergency doesn't mean that there wouldn't be urgent and important safety and health messaging given to Edmontonians.
Great, I appreciate that. Wanted to ask a bit about the transit services. As you mentioned, we're starting to see more people on. We're operating, understandably, on a modified Saturday schedule, and that has meant that a number of areas that have only received peak hour service Monday to Friday still don't have service. That is going to become a challenge in, from what I'm hearing, some of our industrial areas where there had been arrangements made with employees in those areas for the last little while, but starting to get some correspondence from people around them not being able to have an arrangement to get a ride and yet not having any type of transit access. So I don't need the full answer now, but curious as to what steps we think we need to follow in order to start scaling up some of those? I recognize we're not going to go from modified Saturday to Monday to Friday in one step, but particularly areas that have no service now, might they come on first, then you'll start scaling up. Can you share some thoughts on that?
I'll ask Mr. Sebrick to join this.
Councillor, we are looking at each of the different areas of the city as the demand increases and looking at where we can add service. So the approach that we would be taking would be one that we would add incrementally. And while that's going on, of course, we're doing the recover and relaunch work and looking at how we go to that next level of service and when we do that, taking into account factors such as business needs, as well as what the schools and post-secondary are doing. So we're trying to coordinate all of that, but it would be a stepped approach on a route-by-route basis to start with.
Is that something that we'll be able to see in more detail? Just, I think people are curious around when they could start to expect that, and noting things still change, but they're trying to make arrangements as best they can, but some of those are running out from what I'm hearing.
So, Councillor, I think we would be able to provide you with a little bit more of a sort of overview of what the process could look like. But I don't think at this point we could get into the specific routes. There are some that we know are likely to be having the increases sooner than others, but there's others that we're monitoring. But I think we could put together a bit of an overview in terms of what the process will look like between now and when we go to that next level of service across the board.
Okay, great. I'm out of time. I think, Mr. Mayor, I have a few more questions for a second round.
Okay, I'll put you down for a second round. Next up is Councillor Esslinger.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to say, Adam, I really appreciated your comments about embedding GBA Plus and equity lens into the work of the city, and your commitment to look at yourself and the organization through inclusion and diversity. I think they're very powerful words, so thank you very much. I had the opportunity to hear from women that have been involved in WAVE in the past or currently last night, and it reminded me how many individuals are still deeply impacted by the pandemic. Many have lost their jobs, or they're working at home, juggling childcare and household responsibilities. And mental health issues came up predominantly as a strong challenge for many. The other thing that came up was the need for more housing and the demands of the system. So I think the work of the city has just begun as we go through this recover phase. So in light of that, I guess as we move forward, are we anticipating adding back staff, or is that all off until September? Do you have a plan in place to move that forward?
Specifically related to the housing work, Councillor Esslinger, or in general?
General about staffing, because I think there's many departments that are reduced at this time because of our circumstances.
So we continue through the relaunch efforts, continue to look at the reopening of services or reintroduction of higher service levels for the city of Edmonton through the lens of can we do it within the public health requirements that we need, the financial affordability of that service, the long-term sustainability of that service, and if we do see a spike, the ability to turn that service off. So that's a long answer to say we continue to evaluate it. Certainly as services and the demands on services like transit increase, we have to be prepared for that resourcing need to recall some of those temporarily laid off staff. And we noted in the presentation, and the Premier noted it, that there's a potential that rec could be brought into stage 2. And if it is, then we need to evaluate that and see if, using those 4 questions again, to see if we are in a position to bring staff back.
Thank you. Like Councillor Knack, I think because if we don't have soul, people might think you're back to business as usual, but we're a long way from that yet. I do have a couple specific questions. I think I saw in one of your updates that the large facilities for employees wouldn't be available for employees till the end of August. But what about City Hall? Is that on your list of things to look at into the future?
We are actually, Ms. Anderson actually has that review underway right now. Certainly there's a constraint in terms of the limitation on the number of individuals permitted. If there were a relaxation on that, it would become easier, but we're currently assessing the opportunity of potentially reopening City Hall in some form.
Okay, and I didn't see it this week, and maybe I missed it, is the domestic violence. And what I heard last night was also elder abuse, and I'm just wondering if we have that data, or how are we still watching it?
Councillor Reisinger, Rob Smythe here again. We are certainly, I don't have the data in front of me here, but there certainly is some indications that the challenges are marginally increasing. We do have some information that the Edmonton Senior Safe House is currently full. So we do have some of that information. Don't have actual data to share at this point, though.
Thank you. And because what I had heard from women last night was many seniors living with families in small spaces, and there's becoming a lot of pressure and challenges on that front. So I just want to make sure we're ready for that. I don't know if I have any time left, Mr. Mayor.
It's just elapsed. I'm happy to put you down for a second round, though, if you like. Yes?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Henderson is next.
Thanks. So thank you very much. I'm curious because I think the idea of going to biweekly versions of these meetings makes absolute sense to me. I found them really helpful and useful. But we do get, when council being in the opposite in the other week, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm really curious though, because you mentioned the possibility of doing AAC or special council meetings. I think personally, my feeling is there's a huge advantage to using this format for these discussions, but I'm just wondering what your thinking is on that and whether or not, what the difference would be.
Our preference is using this committee, not a special council.
And I would concur with that. Because I think there's some value in that. So the other question is around following up on some of the Expo Center questions, and I think this goes back to the fact that the need for social distancing and all those things hasn't gone away. So part of what we were doing with the Expo Center, my understanding was, and with the Lions and with Kinsman, was allowing for shelters to happen and drop-ins to happen where social distancing could be achieved, which we can't do in our regular spaces. And it also strikes me that places where some of that population traditionally find shelter and interest during the day, places like City Hall, the libraries, are not going to be there. So what's our thinking on how to accommodate the fact that the need for social distancing doesn't go away, although the need for isolation, which I think was the other piece of Expo Center, obviously is less important. I'm just concerned we're just going to move the problem in a different kind of way if we don't think this went through a bit.
Well, Councillor, you're absolutely correct. I mean, are there other buildings in our city that might be some options where we could at least temporarily use for that exact purpose? The challenge, though, is having the province at the table and the resources required to mobilize to another kind of facility. We'll be very challenged to just revert back to the existing agencies and their home facilities. But we have to explore that with all of those agencies in the room.
Yeah, and I'm guessing, do we have any numbers? I suspect we don't, because we would need a full count to do that. of whether or not we've seen an increase in homelessness and the needs during this. I'm guessing we probably have. You know, I just think we need to keep that in mind, that we can't go back to the old business as usual way of doing this as long as the physical distancing necessity is in place. And the numbers may have gone up, and if we push people back into the parks and the ravines and all sorts of things like that, we're going to have a whole nother issue.
Well, Council, it's not either or. There's a many camps that we're working with the individuals that are camped there.
No, I know that. Yeah.
And our team is working on that as we speak. So that is going to be an ongoing challenge for the balance of the summer and going forward.
Yeah, no, thanks. I just wanted to ask the question because I'm not sure. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that we can go back, that the facilities that we've had in the past are going to be sufficient in this climate. So I have one other less important question to ask, but I fired this through the system as well, but I thought I'd raise it here in case others are having the same issue. We've had a program in the past that have allowed communities, for instance, to apply for their rink areas to become dog parks, and we had a whole bunch that were approved. I'm aware of one of them that's been a huge success in past years. I think I'm guessing that when we said no to the other off-leash dog parks, we pulled that program, and I'm just wondering if that's something. It's just one of those little things that may have got not looked at under the once we opened up the other off-leash parks again, whether or not we can go back and have a look at that again. I had the request from one community, but I'm guessing it applies to more than just one. They'd had the approval, we took it back because of COVID, and I'm wondering if we're looking at that again.
I think we certainly can, Councillor Henderson, and I was just checking with Nikki and David. If you could send through those details to us, that would be great.
I think we've already done that. I think we've already sent it on, and I think I haven't heard back yet. I got this yesterday, the day before. I just thought the opportunity was here to flag it in case other had the same experience. So we've already sent the details. It was Kenilworth that right now that's asking, but I'm guessing others are in the same boat.
Okay.
I just thought it was worth flagging. So thanks. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Paquette?
Yeah, thank you. So, and also thank you for the presentation earlier, Adam, and for your words. It's always very difficult to acknowledge an unconscious institutional bias, and that's tough, so thank you. So when it comes to transit, we are going to phase in full payment, is that correct?
Councillor, for the month of June, yes, we will be phasing it in, and then we would continue in July with the Ride Transit program being free for that month for the Ride Transit patrons. But the paid fares would start to be phased in over the month of, starting June 15th through to July is when all of the payments will start getting phased in.
Okay, and at this point, we can't accurately predict what transit is going to look like in the months ahead. Is that about right?
We have a number of different scenarios we've been considering, and we're monitoring it and updating it on a daily basis, but we anticipate that there will be different factors that will affect sort of plateaus as we move forward, as things like businesses and the different stages of relaunch happen throughout the next month. We'll see those increases. We've gone from, at the lowest point, we were down to about 25% ridership, and now we're right around 55%, and that's happened in the last month. So we are seeing increases. We don't anticipate that it's going to be a straight line increase, of course, because of the other factors, but we are trying to predict as best we can the different scenarios, both in the short term and long term.
Okay, yeah, because I've got people who commute to work asking me, so if we're on this reduced service, you're still going to be asking me to pay a full price for fare, even though I've had to make massive adjustments to my commute that actually cost me more money and time. What do we say to that?
So, Councillor, I think we are trying to balance both the fact that we are providing a public transit service as well as the fact that we have limited resources. And I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that before we can make a commitment to go to full service, full weekday services, we have to look at what our financial position is, as we conveyed to council at the start of this during the SOBA. So we're looking at all of those aspects, but I think we are trying to provide as much service as we can. Given the current situation, we are still maintaining some of the things like the service to the hospitals for the special shuttle services. But again, keeping in mind that we will try and increase service in a staged approach as demand increases.
Yeah, I'll just put a flag on that, we often talk about transit riders as our customers. And so if you extrapolate that to looking at transit as a business, probably most businesses wouldn't be charging full price for a reduced service. So just putting a flag in that. Next question is the transit police officers. We're going to see an increase, and that's presumably to educate people on the fair change and to increase feelings of safetiness and ensure proper distancing. But as we heard, maybe we should be looking at doing things a little bit differently. I'm just wondering if we're thinking about adding a social working component to that.
Councillor Rob-Smythe here again. Just to clarify, it's not an increase in the workforce.
Right.
The TPOs have done different kinds of work over the course of the COVID. For example, working on transit from Kinsman to Expo, and as that got stabilized, those individuals then will move back into their regular duties on the trains and at stations and so on. But certainly our first priority obviously is safety. And also embedded in some of those higher level principles is a piece about education. So we're working hard with our TPOs and our peace officers to ensure that they have an understanding of the individuals that are using public transit. And then enforcement really is our final step if required. So we're trying to do a fair bit of training, some of it joint with EPS in terms of understanding the community and how to approach those individuals. So that's where we're at currently, and certainly our social workers, while they don't ride the rails with our TPOs, there's certainly some connection and integration between those two disciplines, if you will. So there's been some good learnings, and just anecdotally a little bit, some of the TPOs that were working out of Expo, it really was a very positive learning experience for those individuals, working hand in glove with those community agencies. So it was a very positive outcome there.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Banga.
Finally, I got my button muted. Thank you very much. But a couple of questions are, with this removal of SOL, are we still able to enforce end of the journey transit to increase ridership?
Yes, we still are able to enforce the non-destination riders.
Okay. And next question is, since the ridership is going up, you said it was about 45% as compared to last year?
Councillor Banga, we're at about 55% now of what normal ridership would be.
Okay. So eventually, I am pretty sure you're looking at different routes, which ones should be brought into circulation or increased frequency. Is there any plan to or consideration for calling those laid-off employees to work sooner than later, or what's the possible date?
It would be based on similar to a previous question that I answered, which is we have to assess the public health, the financial viability, the long-term sustainability, and the ability to quickly turn off should we see a spike in the number of cases. So those are the four things that we use to evaluate whether we would bring staff back from a temporary layoff. And part of that, Councillor Benga, is an ongoing budget conversation that we need to have with you, Council, about choices that we make or commitments that we make related to the various services that we have. Our hope is that we can have that conversation or at least provide an update on some of the budget information soon, and then continue that conversation getting closer to the end of the year.
Well, thank you. Not renewing the state of local emergency. There's a delicate balance between this and stressing that all the provincial guidelines, social distancing, still be kept. How are we going to communicate that to public?
I think it's continuing our communication efforts. It's continuing to have meetings like this where we can engage with you and utilize you and get feedback from you on what you're seeing in the community. It's continued enforcement and not enforcement, sorry, work of our peace officers and other staff to educate, warn, and enforce if needed. And as I mentioned to Councillor Knack, closure if needed. And as Ms. Owen said, ELT has a regular touch point with our efforts related to relaunch and the task team in terms of decision around closures. So we continue using the measures we're using, and again, administratively, if we're not seeing good compliance, we're not afraid to take a step that is more significant, either from an enforcement perspective or closure perspective.
Okay, and a couple of weeks ago, I raised a question that was presented to me by somebody from a driving school, actually a couple of people from driving schools. And when are they expected to be, I guess, allowed to operate? Is it stage 2 or stage 3?
So, Councillor, when we received that concern, we looked into it. At that point, when you asked, it wasn't allowed, given the social distancing restrictions in place, the proximity, and those health concerns. And so we're continuing to monitor the chief medical officer's guidelines. And so once we have some positive news, we'll certainly pass that on to you.
Okay, but since then we had changed their, opened their hair salons, etc., and they fail to see why this can't be done. Anyway, that's you can give it to me, give me that answer later on if you don't want to have nothing right now. What time? How much time do I have, Mr. Mayor?
6, 5, 4.
Okay.
Sorry, real quick.
Please put on for the next.
Our second round, okay.
Please.
Thank you. I have Councillor Walters, then Councillor McKean, then Councillor Zadek still on the first round. Councillor Walters, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'll just begin with, it's interesting to actually be in the room and to see the exhaustion on the, no offense, but on the faces of the mayor and Adam in particular through all this. And so thank you both for your leadership through this as we get to a bit of a threshold of maybe not renewing the emergency. I think it's important to note, and also to thank, Ms. Andrzejczyk, who's been sitting there very diligently all along, providing good advice, certainly to ELT, and to Ms. Anderson, who may look that tired when this is all said and done. Our administration has done a remarkable job, in my opinion, through this pandemic, and I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's worked so hard this whole time. And in terms of not renewing, if you could flip back to the slide that had the pinkish and green coding, there was there we go. So number 2 and number 3 would seem, so just to push back on this for a second for fun, it would seem that number 2 and 3 are pretty important to be in the green. And so I just wanted you to comment on that. I know the 0 homeless cases is almost tells us that should be green, but maybe just talk about why you think those are still not quite a go, and why, since they're not a go, we would recommend not renewing. just say more about that for me.
Yeah, and David can supplement on this, but why they're not in the green and the zero homeless cases is because that the risk associated with that particular population is still high. Good work that's been done. Understand that there's ripple effects with the efforts that we've taken around Expo Center, but to try and minimize the potential for those cases, the good work has been done to, and the results are there to do that, but still a high-risk population. In terms of the second wave, this is where it gets a little tougher. We know there will be a second wave, but on the basis of the prolonged performance that we've seen in terms of the number of cases, we feel comfortable that that's in the yellow category, but we know there will be a second wave, so we do want to watch that closely.
So this is really about the severity of the second wave and what you anticipate.
That's correct. And Mr. Aiken, I don't know if you want to add to that.
So just a few other numbers. We're monitoring as one. Each of these pieces has probably 5 or 6 different measures and metrics, and we just sort of rolled it up into some high-level ones. But we're looking at the active case numbers, and we still see 45 active cases, which is down from last week being 47, down from the previous week being in the 50s. And so we're monitoring that. So it's certainly trending in the right way, hence the yellow. We're not out of the woods by any means. We did see the number of cases increase last week significantly from what we thought was the long weekend, stage 1. And so we did see a significant jump, but not so much so that would put us back into the red. So again, we're closely monitoring those numbers, which suggests a caution and a continuous monitoring of those numbers, why it supports the yellow, not the green.
So on the presumption that I supported the renewal, or the recommendation to not renew, if those cases then went back to, or if those lines went back to red, we could turn this around pretty quickly, hey? So it's a meeting of council, special meeting of council, and then we just vote on a
60 minutes notice.
60 minutes notice. And then you're able to reestablish whatever procedures and protocols, facilities, et cetera, are required if it, say, there was an outbreak at a homeless camp.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And then that is why Mr. Aiken said that we continue to monitor these.
Yeah.
And we won't
and talk about it at our bi-weekly meetings. Now, to Councillor Henderson's questions, and I wasn't completely clear, maybe again for me, because I think this is where potentially one of our biggest cluster of risk lies, is if certain organizations begin to try to provide some level of service or shelter at the point of Expo Center being phased out, how are we overseeing those? Maybe say that again, and I know you kind of answered that for Councillor Caterina, and kind of answered it for Councillor Henderson, but it wasn't clear. What is the pathway back to the hodgepodge of sheltering that takes place in the city for homeless folks?
So working closely with the provincial government, Ministry of Community Social Services, Alberta Health Services, and the agencies that are in Edmonton to determine with the potential shutdown of Expo Center, what are the receiving facilities to support this population in a physical distancing manner. And the team has also had discussions around in an effort to try and minimize movement as much as possible. While there's a target date, our comfort level needs to be with all of those groups, that there is a good plan in place before we take that step to close Expo Center. And that's the work that Mr. Smythe, Mr. Aiken, Ms. Ford have been working so hard on, is to make sure that it's clear what that plan is before we make a closure of something that is currently working to support that community, and again, recognizing that it has caused ripple effects within a particular area.
Okay, I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKeon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wondered, given the importance of this topic that Councillor Walters was just on, whether or not we could get regular updates, because EAC will only happen every 2 weeks now, through memo on how the plan for sheltering and otherwise looking after our homeless community. Could we get those in memo, do you think?
Councillor Rob Smythe again here. We can take that back. I don't see why not. We can get a little format or template in terms of status. Certainly we collect that data regularly in terms of the camps and the status of the camps. We don't have a direct pipeline into the shelters, but certainly Homeward Trust, working with Susan McGee, we're joined at the hip with Homeward Trust, so they would have some information as well. And they do provide us with some information, so we can take that back and see how that can be provided to City Council.
We seem to still have a proliferation of camps and a proliferation of problems that I'm hearing about all over Ward 6, camping, fires, litter, public defecation, urination, and it's alarming people. As you can imagine, we're hearing a lot about it. And my response has been that we've had to be a little more gentle, a little more hands-off, a little more permissive because of COVID. So that's those are the kind of things that I'm hoping we might see addressed in your plan as it develops, Mr. Smythe, and we would get sort of any changes in strategy in your plans, just so we're updated. I think it's really important, not only from a public health perspective, but the costs are huge to first responders and by law and all sorts of city services that are struggling to keep up as we speak. So a memo or a regular set of memos on that, I don't know if we would need a motion on that, Mr. Mayor, but I would really think that would be valuable for a lot of us.
And just a reminder, Councillor, we have a report at Council this Monday on the housing strategy, if you will.
Yep, exactly. I think I have a bit of time. I keep getting emails, people really frustrated. It's summertime and they want to enjoy some of the parks and other areas that have water features. Is it possible we'll see those turned back on this summer, Mr. Laughlin?
We will not actually see those turned back on this summer. Just a reminder that was a financial decision that we made.
Okay. Fair enough. So the only way we would be able to do that is through a motion of council and with a source of funding, I suppose.
Also some public health considerations, Councillor McKeon, that we need to make sure that we're aware of. Swimming pools are currently identified in stage 3. So it would be the ongoing discussion related to budget and public health.
Yeah, some of them are a little smaller, little community amenities, whether it's to help community gardens or fountains and such, which I'm getting a lot of email about. Last quick question, any updates on the enforcement effort around noisy vehicles and speeding?
Councillor, the information I have as of June 2nd is that we did issue 71 fines so far, which I probably is looking for a higher number, but we have done some joint work with EPS. There's been 2 joint operations, May 22nd and May 30th. So certainly a full court press on that piece.
Well, Mr. Smythe, I hope you keep that up. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Zadig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's some the COVID signage, the distancing and other suggestions or rules has been removed. I've been notified of signage being found in garbage cans and the like, or just strewn around the ground. I'm thinking about a Beaumaris Lake, but other places as well. What is it a ticketable offense to remove this signage, and what are we doing to replace it, or what's our thoughts on that?
So there are a couple of regulatory provisions relative to interference and also littering. So if we see that or come upon it, or the investigation proves that we can have the evidence to lay those charges, we can certainly do that. And where signs are removed, as soon as we're notified, we can have those replaced.
Okay, but it doesn't sound like it's part of our routine. Like if we have a landscaping crew going out somewhere, it's not part of their mandate or their work directions to look for signs that have been removed. I'm just trying. Is there an easy way to be aware of their removal?
So two ways. Citizens can certainly call 311 and let us know through that vehicle, or we often get referrals from other operational areas, either to ourselves or communications, that those signs need to be replaced.
Oh, that's good. As much as, having the onus on citizens is one thing, but having an internal mechanism is also good. You, in your email daily memo to council on ELT, you talked about relaxing some rules around drive-in outdoor events. Can you just provide clarity about where we might see administration making an advancement on this front? So to be clear, in written communication, you said that there'd be we're looking into something around having more than 50 people attend drive-in events.
I think the notion was that when it comes to outdoor events and the current limitations, there are a number of interesting and different ideas in how individuals that either for faith groups or gatherings are looking at how they can not be counted to the provincial directives and orders relative to social distancing, but also can accommodate some community or social needs. And so we continue to work with those groups when they ask us those questions, provide as much clarity as we can, and also, or direct them to Alberta Health Services. But I think there's lots of opportunities, and people are seeking that clarification, and we'll do our best to provide that where we can.
Thank you. And finally, as much as I've been against renewing the local state of emergency for the past several weeks, or I think 6 weeks now, for various reasons, I do note that today you're not recommending the renewal, but I was wondering if you looked into options other than just the 7-day default that we've been doing. For example, in your opinion, you think that 2 or 3 days would make more sense, maybe to get us through to have it effective to Monday morning or Sunday at midnight. Obviously, I've indicated how I feel about that in the past, but I just wanted to check to see that if you're just not taking the all or nothing approach of 7 days only. Would it be beneficial to the city, in your opinion, to have a local state of emergency covering this weekend?
No. I think where we've landed is on the basis of the data and the performance of Edmontonians, and monitoring the performance of how stage 1 is opened, that we feel comfortable that this is a good step. But as has been noted earlier, if we do see something that takes us into the red for any of these items, we will act quickly to request a reinstatement of that. But I think for covering this weekend under our delegation, we feel comfortable that we can manage any compliance issues that are within the city.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you. Any other questions on the first round? I'll jump in then. So one of the issues we've had that I've got, and I think you have verbal assurance around, is the delegated authority of peace officers to enforce the provincial health guidelines. And I think we have that. Do we have that in writing now up to June 15th? Or there's there's two issues. Do we have it? And I think we do, but I want to verify. And do we have it beyond June 15th? Or does it require a renewal action on the part of the province to delegate that authority?
So it's in place up until they relinquish the public health emergency.
And then a ministerial order of some kind would be required to
Correct.
extend it beyond that?
And
that's-
verbally, we've had commitments that that will happen. Ms. Andrzejczyk has written a letter to the province asking for it in writing, but we have yet to receive that specific instruction that if the public health emergency is not renewed or relapses from the province, that we can still do that. We haven't gotten that written confirmation yet.
So that's the one gap from a City of Edmonton enforcement point of view, because Dr. Hinshaw's orders don't depend on the public health emergency, but the delegated authority for us to enforce her orders so far does, and requires some additional move by the province to continue that delegated authority for us to continue to enforce her orders, which will continue to stand beyond June 15th. Have I got that right?
I was just confirming the date. We have till June 23rd, and we've asked for an extension beyond that date.
Oh, okay. Okay, I think we just need to pursue that to be crystal clear. I think on the recommendation around reporting to here every second Thursday, I think I agree with that recommendation, and I think we just will need to be really clear about what's reporting here on continued emergency management, even though it's not a full-on state of local emergency. There's still very much an active situation that needs to be managed and monitored through the lenses of, among other things, the 9 indicators, as well as the actual pandemic metrics themselves, and what's happening. I mean, we all see those reported publicly, but we need to understand what the municipal or civic administration interpretation of those is, and whether they change these indicators. That'd be sort of our primary oversight purpose of convening EAC every 2 weeks.
And update. Recall that before the pandemic hit, we did have EAC meetings on occasion to provide progress in terms of our efforts to improve on that.
General preparedness.
Correct.
But now it's continuing to monitor a live situation that tests our preparedness all the time, and then the ability to pivot.
That's correct.
But then also, to the extent that you're within your delegated authority acting around your interpretation of the orders, they're Dr. Hinshaw's orders, but there's an opportunity to communicate publicly and answer questions from council about how the city interprets those orders when it comes to playgrounds and vehicles for hire.
Correct.
And all of those kinds of things.
Correct.
So
Through
it would be our
guidelines.
place to exercise oversight through question and answer of how you're using your delegated authority, but not to micromanage the use of your delegated authority.
That would be ideal for administration.
Okay. That sounds reasonable. And then lastly, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit, there is a sort of, whether it's the forest fire gauge or whether it's the DEFCON scale, there are lots of 3, 4, 5 degrees of severity kind of scales out there in the world that people have seen and are familiar with. And lifting the sole doesn't take us back to green and everything's fine. It takes us down from, red or orange to yellow or somewhere in between at this point. Is there value in us looking at whether we might want to ask the province, just as they have a general province-wide emergency and then they have a public health emergency which has more limited powers, would there be value in us asking the province or doing some reflection on what would be useful, but perhaps not a full state of local emergency, but a public health emergency at the municipal scale and a more limited toolbox than the broad set of tools that come under the current emergency management legislation?
I think lessons learned are always important in work that we do, and I think with the understanding that this is going to be a longer-term situation from a pandemic perspective. Until we have a vaccine, we can expect that these orders and the expectations and guidelines and behaviors is going to remain consistent. Evaluating whether you need all of the tools or some of the tools, especially during this situation, I think would be beneficial. And also it helps to create clarity around, you know, what levers were pulled and what levers were under our delegation as it relates to our response to this pandemic.
Okay, so I think it's probably time for that first after-action report from a governance point of view, so I'm going to bring a motion later on just to set in motion some of that review work, recognizing there's still ongoing work to do, but as we learn as we go, what can we do with it and share with the province? So I'll bring something forward in a little bit here. I'm just tinkering with the wording. In the meantime, we've got Councillor Knack, Councillor Essinger, and Councillor Banga on the second round. So go ahead, Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few smaller questions, just based off some feedback I heard. I know in a number of locations, the city is, and we've seen this in businesses, up the access to things like hand sanitizer. I heard a lot of requests for that around some of our larger park spaces where there are, you know, spots where we might be able to do that. I don't know if that's something we've looked at. There were just a number of groups that were suggesting that might be of value. And is that even possible to put something like that in those locations, or are we worried about damage to them? Or
Ask Mr. Sebrick to comment on that.
Councillor, we haven't looked at that yet. We've really been restricting those type of things to some more contained facilities. Just at this point, we haven't, but we can take it away and see what that might look like. But at this point, we haven't done any detailed work on providing hand sanitizer.
That's fine. I just relayed that as one of the groups of seniors that I was chatting with yesterday. That was one of their flags for me. And I think actually, maybe one last question related to the patio expansion work, and I imagine Councillor Henderson would know more. I had a chance to go by on Friday night and noticed that it felt almost like a lot of people didn't realize that the extra space is actually where they could walk. And I was just curious if there's been any thought around that. Maybe it's started to change over the last few days. Like I say, it's been close to a week since I was there, and that was day one. But have you heard anything about that, or is there any? Are you seeing generally people using that space now?
I'll ask Mr. Sebrick to see if he's heard on the walkable space.
So, Councillor Knack, nothing specifically. We've been working really closely with the BIAs in terms of where we want to provide that space and where we want to expand the patios. But we can take it away and see what there is in terms of feedback. But certainly, as anytime we implement something new, there is a bit of an adoption period in terms of people getting accustomed to what the new protocol or the new opportunity is. So we can get a sense of what that looks like and provide you an update next week.
No need for me. I thought I'd identify, and again, I prefer if you're chatting with the BIA and Councillor Henderson, they'd be the ones. I just happened to see it firsthand, so I thought I'd raise it. So those are all my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Essinger?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions left. One of them I noted was you were re-looking at the permitting garage sales. Now, is that a city decision, or does that fall under a provincial phase 1, 2, or 3?
It's actually, I would say, a combination. So from a city perspective, we did look at it again this week and assessed it as continuing to be a risk. Basically, they encourage gatherings in a location that's hard to maintain physical distance with items that have been handled recently and then touched by multiple parties in a day. So it's a little bit different than when we look at the guidance for retail. which we would expect at garage sales, so things like having hand sanitizer, encouraging individuals to leave the premise quickly. But because of the temporary nature of garage sales, we weren't comfortable with opening those up yet. And also just a note that for citizens that are looking to, get rid of goods, there are other ways to do that. So whether it's secondhand stores, things like Kijiji, Facebook Online, there are other ways to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then really a number of our financial decisions aren't related to, I guess, the state of local emergency, the pools, the green shacks, that's a financial decision out of our response to COVID, right? And we're not changing any of those this summer. I just want to confirm that.
That's correct. Other than pools are in stage 3 of the relaunch from the province, so they would obviously have a restriction, but our decisions, you're correct, went through that 4-question exercise of can we afford it, public health concerns, sustainability, and can we turn it off quickly. But to Councillor McKean's comment earlier, if during one of our budget updates, if there's a desire from council to pursue, it is there. It would just be on the basis of what funding is available.
So if I understand that correctly, even if the province allowed it, we may not do it because of a financial decision, which council will decide if that's what we want to do, correct?
That's correct. I would overlay that if we felt from a public health perspective through AHS, we didn't feel comfortable, even though the province has indicated an opening, we may not still support an opening. That hasn't been the case on any of these to this point. So I would suspect that it would either be a financial or our ability to turn it off quickly and sustainability, as the drivers around a decision to keep closed.
All right. Thank you so much. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Banga?
Thank you. Just a couple more questions. One is about, I guess, closure or shutting down of Expo Center and facilities like that. Is it only going to be only like, a cold stop, or is it going to be a gradual shutdown?
Councillor Benga, that determination hasn't been made yet. We need to get the input from the GOA and Homeward Trust that we're working with. So it's very much a work in progress.
Okay, Mr. Loughlin, when you said in your presentation that open spaces amenities May 30th to June 4, it was good compliance. What does that mean?
Recall, Councillor Benga, that we made a decision to close 4 outdoor amenities because individuals were not adhering to the provincial orders of physical distancing or size of the groups. Since we reopened those and the ongoing monitoring of the outdoor amenities, we're seeing good compliance in relation to those health orders.
Okay. Just going back to Expo Center for a moment again. Just crime and disorder in that it's not just going to go, I guess, one day it is there, next day it's not going to be there. But the powers of the peace officers and police officers, they're there to address that portion, isn't it? Aren't they?
Certainly, the plan that we put in place several weeks ago in regards to supporting the exterior of Expo did have a combination of EPS members, just as regular beats patrol in the Northeast, work with our transit peace officers, the NET team going into the communities providing support. So there are a number of different agencies and groups trying to tackle those various problems.
Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Councillor Banga. Maybe in lieu then of a motion, Madam Clerk, have you got the wording there?
I do. If you just give us a few seconds, we'll get it up on the screen, and so that the councillors can see it, I'll
Sure.
broadcast from what's up here, so we're all
Sure.
looking at the same thing.
Yeah, I'll read it in, though I'll move that given the state of local emergency will expire today, and given the need to provide regular updates about the regular and ongoing issuance of health orders by the provincial chief medical officer of health, as well as the city's ability to execute and enforce those orders, 1, that administration provide regular minimum biweekly updates to Emergency Advisory Committee on pandemic metrics, emergency management indicators, and the city's public health response, and report to council or the relevant committees where able on all other matters requiring city council direction, oversight, or resources for the state of relaunch and readiness. 2, that administration bring a report to council based on lessons learned to date, including A, any recommendations for changes to relevant to city policies and bylaws, and B, any constructive feedback the city might have for the province, including but not limited to recommended further amendments to the Emergency Management Act that could enable municipalities to enact less drastic pandemic emergency management measures to assist in managing public health emergencies that run over a longer period of time and require less sweeping authority than contemplated in the current act, where events are typically shorter and have more clearly defined beginning and end points, and where the emergency powers are broad and all-encompassing. And 3, that the mayor write to the relevant provincial ministries to confirm assurances that municipal peace officers' authority to enforce public health orders will be extended beyond June 23rd, is what that should read, not June 15, based on Ms. Andrzejczyk's answers. So these are all governance follow-ups based on the work we've done here, but it's a recommendation through to council because some of these decisions ranging from scheduling to writing letters are in council's jurisdiction. But this puts it in play. We can debate it today or we can debate it more thoroughly next week. I can't actually give notice here, otherwise I'd have just done this as notice, strangely. So I figure it's just easier as a motion. I think the premise of it, based on the questions and the discussion, is fairly self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take questions on it. Any questions?
If I could second it, I would.
Someone will have to at council, so feel free when it gets up there. If there are, so yeah, again, we'll get another crack at this, and if there are amendments or adjustments to it, and I've consulted with Mr. Laughlin and co on this, so they've seen it already for what it's worth. If there's nothing further, we can go to the vote. Just checking.
Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Yes, Councillor McKean, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'd asked about that periodic memo on the expo and other facilities and our strategy in regards to vulnerable people. That would be included in this then, yes?
I think the Expo Center piece would be included in the updates mentioned in Part 1 to EAC. So those would come to us here. If there's a desire to get additional information around the housing issue more broadly, I think my advice would be to, if that's over and above COVID, because it sort of is, and it's sort of the underlying issue, then I think probably we can build a subsequent motion around reporting after we have the housing conversation next week at council. So
yeah, I'd agree. No, I just wanted to confirm that I think this motion completely satisfies my earlier concern that I'd raised. So I appreciate it. And I will support when it comes up.
Okay. Yeah, the Expo piece, as long as it's running, would continue to be part of the EAC reporting, I think, but let me just verify that with Mr. Laughlin.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Zadek?
Just quick, to possibly just correct a technical issue. Do we want the bi-weekly meetings to go on indefinitely? Well, obviously not, but do we want to state an end in here, or can that be revisited when required?
That's a good question. I think clerks are bringing a schedule motion next week. So yeah, they probably shouldn't go forever, but it's hard to say whether this thing's going to go for months or for years in this vein. So I think we could say I don't know, when would you expect we might revisit that?
We can bring that back in the report that we're planning to bring back to council on Monday.
Okay. Why don't we wait to see what's in the report on Monday and have that discussion in the context of schedule? But it's a really good question. I just think we might have more information to fill in this motion on Monday when we see those other reports. Is that satisfactory, Councillor? Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. This is not forever, hopefully. Any other questions? Okay, we'll make that adjustment on Monday once we see the calendar. Okay, then I suppose we're at the vote. Please vote.
Yes.
I have 11 online and 2 verbal, Mr. Mayor, 13 to go.
Okay, thank you. Display the vote. That's carried unanimously. I think that can be the motion for 3-1. What's the cleanest thing to do for 3-2? Delete or receive for information instead, or?
Could you just receive it for information, please?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Banga. So to receive 3.2 for information, which, to be crystal clear, the recommendation is to not renew the state of local emergency, which therefore, from the last time we declared it, for 7 days, not 90, just to be crystal clear, if a certain outlet is listening. So this would let it effectively lapse. So thank you, Councillor Banga, for that motion. Councillor Nicol has already voted yes. Everybody else, please cast your votes. Oh, hold on, sorry, I see comments on this. Please pause the vote. I should have checked to see if anyone else had any comments. Councillor Knack, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, and I know there's other items, but actually not doing this is pretty important. And just a little bit to the questions I had earlier, I thought it was worth restating what I think all of us know, which is that there is still a pandemic. There is still a public health emergency, at least for a while, and there's still people who are vulnerable to this. And so by not renewing it doesn't negate the fact that those other realities still exist. And just because it had come up in some of my conversations this week, and people have been, some of the correspondence I've been getting has been oddly angry at any type of decisions that have been made over the last 10 weeks to lock things down, which although we're primarily provincial, it's just worth, again, I think saying out loud that I think the reason that the city of Edmonton was as successful as we were, noting that there were still people that lost their lives and that there were still people who got ill, we had relatively better success in our numbers because of our diligence. So I just hope that by not renewing this, and I'm going to support receiving this for information, that we don't forget that, and again, I realize anyone probably here in City Hall who's listening or that knows this, but I think we just need to stress that a lot over the coming days and weeks, so that people know we still have an obligation, we still have a responsibility to make sure we're protecting those who might not be able to, who might have health conditions or concerns that could be expanded on if they were to receive this. So I just, sorry to jump in with that, I just felt I wanted to say that out loud, especially based off some of the correspondence I got this week from people thinking that, all of this is being done to try and crush the economy, and there was really no health rationale for any of the decisions that have been made over the last 10 weeks. And I think that's actually completely false and worth saying out loud. Thank you.
That's well said, Councillor. Thank you. Anybody else? Not seeing any. Please vote.
So, Mr. Mayor, assuming that we suspended the previous vote, I've got 11 online. I have 12 online.
Then I'll say yes again.
Thank you.
Display the vote, please. That's carried. Unanimously, for what it's worth. Okay, I need a motion to go in private now. I'm going to ask for your indulgence to not take the break at 3:30, but take the break very briefly now while we go in private.
So moved.
So with that adjustment to the agenda implicit, Councillor Walters has moved that we go in private, subject to Section 24, advice from officials, to get a briefing on event update verbal report. So please vote to go in private.
Yes.
I have 12 votes, Mr. Mayor. We're good to go.
Display the vote. That's carried unanimously. So let's take just a few minutes to refresh our
We're just waiting to confirm that the web streaming is back live, Mr. Mayor. And we're live, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We are back online. I now need a motion to receive item 4.1, the event update verbal report, and keep it in private subject to section 24 of FOIP.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Walters. Unless there's any debate, please vote on keeping that.
I'll vote yes verbally. Aye.
Yes.
I have 11 online and 2 verbal, thank you. 13.
Okay, display the vote. And that is carried. Is there any other business arising?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'll make as a point of privilege, if you can rule on it, because I was present, just had a technical issue for the votes relating to the adoption of the minutes and the adoption of the agenda, or approval of the minutes, I should say. My issue is just the way it's going to be recorded in the next set of minutes. It's going to say I was absent from a portion of the meeting without notice. Since I was here, and if you granted a little bit of latitude with the technology that we're all adapting to, if we could just reconsider those 2 votes, I'd appreciate that. So that's my point of privilege. You can rule on.
Yes. That your point is understood, and I hear that you were making best efforts to attend and thought you were present but were unable to participate in the votes. I think there's no way to recall the roll call, but we can recall the votes so that the record shows everyone voting who had intent to be there. So if I can get a motion from one of the 12 who were able to participate in the original vote to recall. Is that you, Councillor Nicol?
Yes.
Okay, so and if that could be to recall the approval of the agenda and the approval of the minutes, which were the 2 things we voted on at the beginning. We can do that in one shot, I think.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So is that satisfactory, Council Nicol, to move that we recall the vote on
Yes.
1.3 and 1.4? Okay. Please vote on recalling the vote.
Yes, verbally.
Yes.
Which is different than reconsideration. It's a small technicality, but
I have 2 verbals and 11 online.
display the vote, please. And that's carried unanimously.
Just to clarify, that was actually 12-1. It was not unanimous.
Okay, can we correct that and display the vote again?
Just take us a second and we'll get it back up, Mr. Mayor.
Display the vote, and that's carried 12-1. So now, separately, recalling the vote on 1.3.
Mr. Mayor, on a point of privilege, I apologize, but because we're using this technology, we can't see the vote.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I was recorded as a yes.
Yes, you were.
Thank you.
If there's that's not a request for a roll call, but if there is one, I can tell you what it is. But if there isn't, then we'll let it go. So
Mr. Mayor, is it
Yes.
possible to see who?
Yes,
or who
Councillor
voted
Councillor
no?
Hamilton voted in opposition to recalling the vote.
Thank you.
And all other members of council voted in favor. Okay, I have somewhere to be at 4:30, so please vote again on the adoption of the agenda.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, if I can speak just for 1 second on this. This is unusual, and
Go on.
I think we need a better process for this. If I miss a vote, I miss a vote. And that's on me. And there's multiple avenues to communicate. So I just want to put that on record before I vote. I will vote in
Sorry, I
favor
should
of
have
this.
ruled you out of order. I don't think there's a second round of debate, or this is not debatable. So I shouldn't have let you speak,
Right.
Councillor.
All right, my
No, it's my error as chair. So please vote on 1.3, the adoption of the agenda for the meeting that is finished now.
Yes.
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 That's 13, Mr. Mayor.
Display the vote. That's carried unanimously. And on the motion to approve the minutes, as previously moved by Councillor Knack, I'll recall the vote on that. Yes.
Yes.
That's 13, Mr. Mayor.
Meeting adjourned.